Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. There may still be a few people logging on. We had about 5 people RSVP to this. So as they're logging on, I'm going to share a couple Zoom etiquette tips and requests for everyone. First, feel free to turn your video on or leave it off. We will be recording this, so your name or your head might actually appear on the screen for a little bit. We've also placed you all on mute just as a courtesy to everyone, but we very much welcome participation, and we'll use the chat for a little conversation during this event at one point. For the best view of this program, we recommend that you use the viewer or the side-by-side setting rather than gallery. Probably you're seeing a slide right now that says the program will begin soon at the bottom. That's great. We'll be switching between slides and a video feed, so just know that your screen appearance will change as the program goes on. All right, so a quick overview of this tour. We'll start with an introduction to Vera Clement, the artist, and then we'll take a closer look at a couple paintings in this exhibition and discuss Vera's biography, her influences, and her process. We really appreciate you all joining us today. If you're not familiar with the art gallery, we are a GVSU department. Sorry, there's a couple people still joining us. Hello, if you're just joining us. I'm going to start my sentence again. For anyone not familiar with the GVSU art gallery, we're a campus department that collects, cares for, exhibits, and fosters the interpretation of artwork across campus. If you've ever been inside any campus building, you'll know that art is literally everywhere. We visit classes, we provide learning materials, and we host tours like this. There's a lot more information on our website. And if you want to stay up to date with us, follow us on social media at GVSU Art. All right, so like I said, we're really thrilled that you're interested in this exhibition called Vera Clement. It's on view now at the Haas Center for Performing Arts Gallery through April 9th, and we are open to the public. Our hours are listed on our website. I'm Amanda Rainey, our User Experience and Learning Manager with the Art Gallery, here along with Joel Zwart, the Curator of Exhibitions, who's going to kick off this conversation. So I'm going to stop sharing my slide, and Joel is going to take over from here.
All right, so I'm going to unmute for a minute, and I'll switch the camera on just to say hello so you can see my face. Welcome, I'm Joel Zwart. I'm the Curator of Exhibitions. And we opened this exhibition at the Grand Valley State University Art Gallery last week. So we're glad you're joining us on this virtual tour around the gallery. And we'll be looking at, as Amanda said, we'll be looking at a few paintings, and also the one of the paintings we'll be looking at will be one from our collection too, which is not on view, but you can see it either on our website or visit it on campus. I'm standing in front of her last work, 2019 Carpeted. And I'll switch this around here for a minute. And in front of me here, I'm looking at 3 other works by Vera. These are some earlier works from her. And so we're excited to have you. And again, as Amanda said, if you have a question, just use the chat. This exhibition came together with the support of Vera and Max Clement, as well as the Zola Lieberman Gallery in Chicago. So I just wanted to mention that and thank them. Vera has been a fixture in the Chicago art world for over 40 years, and she's been represented by Zola Lieberman Gallery for many of those years. So when we began to explore the idea of an exhibition of Vera's work, the opportunity to draw on her extensive experience and her personal collection allowed us to present a comprehensive picture of how her work evolved in the most substantial part of her career. So included in this exhibition are 11 large-scale paintings. This is typical of Vera. So you'll see throughout the gallery, just with Amanda and I here, just the scale of these images. Most of them are over 6, 7, some 8 feet. So they're large paintings. And they began in 1981. And her last painting, of course, is the one I was standing in front of in 2019. Vera Clement's paintings show us a powerful personal vision of what she conceives with her mind's eye in a career spanning over 6 decades, beginning in New York and then Chicago. Her work reflects an amalgamation of many influences. From classical music to literature to modern art, these themes are filtered through her early formative experience fleeing the Nazis with her family just before the Second World War, and a lifetime examining that loss of home and identity. A little bit of background on Vera. She was born in 1929 between the two world wars in the free city of Danzig, now Gdansk, in Poland, which had been set up following the First World War. Clement's childhood was imbued with music and literature, primarily from her mother, a pianist. And then in 1938, Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass, and you can see an image of that on the slide on the upper right, heralded the overt oppression of Jews throughout Europe. And Vera's family was not untouched in this event either. She recalls having the door broken down in their home and then leaving the next day, sort of very casually, as not to appear to arouse any suspicion, and going to relatives and then eventually leaving. It's an experience that still haunts her and a memory that she returns to in her work. And we'll talk a little bit about that with some of her paintings. And I imagine that being ripped from your home and experiencing the traumatic beginnings of the Second World War, a lower part of that slide, you can see the announcement of the beginning of the Second World War in 1939. And the Holocaust had a profound effect on Vera. Her family settles in New York City, where she decides that she wants to be an artist. And she studies at the Cooper Union. So we have an image on this next slide of the Cooper Union. Graduating in 1950. So you can, to give you some kind of perspective of when she was there, she was studying in the 1950s, moving into her career during the 50s, and then into the 60s. In her studies, she was exposed to Cubism and collage. Those are two of the primary influences she recalls in school that was being taught. These influences play out in her work, and you can see that in some of her pieces, early pieces as well as later pieces. Also during the 1940s and 50s, abstract expressionism was becoming the provocative new art form. This is the emphasis on spontaneous or subconscious creation. And this too had an influence on our work along with other artists, such as Edward Hopper. And if you're familiar with Edward Hopper's work, there's a feeling of solitude in his work. So that's something that she remarks about, as well as Mark Rothko. And there's an image of Rothko standing in front of one of his color field paintings on the upper right of this slide. After some success in the New York art world, including making connections with the American art critic Harold Rosenberg, who that would come into play later in her career as well, as we'll find out. He actually coined the term action painting, which was in reference to the abstract expressionist movement. So following this, Vera eventually left for Chicago in 1964. And that's where Amanda's going to pick up.
Thanks, Joel. So the first couple paintings that we're going to take a closer look at are these. We've got Sojourner, painted in 1979 on the left, and then Hollander Witness from 1981 here on the right. And we actually have Hollander Witness here in the gallery. These were both painted in Chicago around a time that Vera really began hitting her stride in the creative community in Chicago. When she first moved to Chicago, there was actually sort of a dead period of about 7 years when she didn't exhibit. And in part, that was because when she arrived in Chicago, the dominant art form looked nothing like what she was doing. And she would even describe her work at that time as being New York art. And she felt that there was a huge aversion to that type of work in Chicago. There was a group of Chicago artists at that time called the Harry Who, just to give you an idea of the type of artwork that was popular. And the Harry Who were working in sort of a cartoony kind of style. If you can picture a work of art that is one part pop art, so think Andy Warhol, and then one part like Ren and Stimpy cartoons, if you recall those from the 90s. There was a lot of grotesque imagery, cartoony, like I said, and it was a lot of high shock value. So if you picture that and then you look at the paintings that we have up here on the slide, I think it's obvious that Vera's work was very different. Eventually, Vera connected with a group of artists called PAC, or Participating Artists of Chicago. And from there, she met a handful of other artists who were working in a similar style, meaning large, expressive, abstract work. And they formed a collective called The Five. And with The Five, she began exhibiting in lobbies of buildings around Chicago. And it was that experience and some of the challenges that she experienced in trying to get her work physically into the building that kind of triggered the style that we see in all of the paintings here in the gallery. And we see her also pursuing for the last 30 to 40 years of her painting career. So one of these building lobbies was on the campus of Chicago, and it was a really large space, but the doors to physically get into the space were just regular double doors. So Vera was interested in creating a very large piece, but to physically get it in the space, she had to paint it across multiple canvases. So she did that, and she ended up bolting the canvases together, and that sort of got the wheels spinning for her. She was really interested in what a painting could do across multiple canvases. She likened it to what a piece of music or a play or a film could do, in that it engages the element of time. And so she really felt that by painting a single work across multiple canvases, that she brought in that element of time and expanded the message or the meaning that she could communicate with these types of work. So in this piece, Hollander Witness, I have a couple close-up photos to share with you. You can see that in this close-up image on the right, she hasn't used a separate stretched canvas, meaning a canvas that's supported by a wood frame on the back end, but she's actually just taken a piece of the canvas fabric to paint that green field on, and then just adhered it directly to the main canvas. And I like to point that out because that idea of using multiple canvases and collage has taken different forms in her work throughout the years. She also at this time began painting single objects on the white background, which you see in, I think, almost every single one of the paintings in the gallery right now. And she was doing that in a really loose gestural brushwork. So really abstract forms that simply reference the object rather than depict it realistically. So it was also around this time that she began drawing as a totally separate exercise. So a lot of artists will create drawings in preparation for paintings, but Vera really viewed these drawings as a totally separate practice. And so I have a clip that I'm going to share with you in a moment. And just before the point that our clip starts, she's talking about these drawings and looking at them objectively and really appreciating them more than she was appreciating or enjoying her paintings at that time. And from these drawings is where the emergence of the single object on a white background really comes from. So I want to play that clip with you.
And I thought about the vessel. The vessel, I said to myself, I talked to myself a lot, it must have been the first art form ever made. And it was probably made by women kneeling on the bank of some river in the mud and making stuff to hold their food and their water. And it's a form that holds, that's open, that's about fecundity. It has the shape of a pregnant woman. It has the shape of the world. It's round and so forth. And so I made some drawings. I mean, they were very abstract, mind you, still, with squiggly lines. And I looked at these drawings and I thought, I like these better than my paintings. And I had to figure out why. And I concluded that covering the canvas from side to side and top to bottom created a field, whereas drawing the vessel in the middle of a white sheet of paper meant it was an object. And I thought that an object had more potential for being a metaphor than a field.
So that was really a pivotal change in Vera's work, and we'll see echoes of that vessel form against a white background throughout the rest of her work in the gallery. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Joel to take a deep dive into another piece.
Thanks, Amanda. So we're going to be looking at actually a work that is much further on in her career than the work we were just looking at, Hollander Witness, which was from 1981. We're launching all the way towards the end of Vera's career. This work, Blossoming, is from 2008. And as you can see on the slide, even this large abstract figure at the top, on the top canvas, can be an object, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be a recognizable object. So that's just something to bear in mind. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about this work, and then we'll get up close and look at some parts of it as well. Light and dark, beauty and evil, life and death, joy and sorrow. This is in the introductory text for the exhibition, but these are common themes that are found throughout Vera's work. And so just something to think about when we're looking at her work. She pairs up canvases and she pairs up themes together. Drawing on her memories and experience, Clement often pairs two symbolic objects or images that juxtapose and carries these themes on her canvases like a personal poem. Amongst the controlled chaos of each piece, these poem paintings confront the viewer with hints of her past, a nostalgic longing for what is forever lost. And this work, entitled Blossoming, is one of her last works. The work shifts Vera's traditional arrangement of canvases side by side by placing one over the other. So that's a little bit different from a lot of the other works that we have in the gallery and a lot of our other works, where the two canvases are side by side. Here, it's one over top of the other. I'm going to grab. So on the bottom, and if you want to grab the, yep. We have two of them here. There's a canvas, a long and narrow canvas on the bottom. And then on the top, we have a larger canvas up here. On the bottom, the narrow canvas appears dull and absent, with a real flat application of paint. Lines run into the distance. You can sort of see the perspective that the lines create here. They don't also provide really any destination. So that's one of the things that I remember thinking about with these lines, is that they kind of have this feeling of this urban map, and yet there's no real destination to them all. And you can see different applications of paint here too. So we have taping. So Vera is coming in and taping these very straight lines and then painting to create that the rigidity of it. And then a light gray taupe sort of wash over everything. And then coming in with a brush with a little bit more organic white cream color paint over top, which has the appearance almost of snow. So this almost feels like a listless winter landscape. Okay, do you want to switch back to the slide? So for me, it really, the scene really evokes a grayness. Not unlike, I was thinking, I actually had to watch I was watching a film on the Holocaust with my son. It was something that he needed to do for his class. And I was thinking a little bit about the sort of this landscape on the bottom underneath this sort of large explosion of paint on the top, in the way that the landscape on the bottom really represents lifelessness. And it really reminded me of scenes from some of the Holocaust movies. Schindler's List, for example, is a work where it's filmed entirely in black and white. And of course, there's a few scenes with this young girl that she's her dress is, or her jacket's red. And it really, I think, emphasizes the desolation of the time. It also made me think of this image, and Amanda has it pulled up on the screen there. It's a still from The Pianist, which is another great movie from 2002. And so that lower landscape to me kind of evoked some of those same feelings, those feelings of desolation. And you can see ways in which the painting serves kind of as a landscape of the world that Vera left behind. And the listlessness of the lower scene is really overpowered by the canvas above it. So there's an explosion of paint and color that really dominate the larger canvas, while this huge shape really just blossoms in front of the viewer. It's a real interesting comparison between this very small, the smaller canvas at the bottom and the larger canvas at the top. So there's paint that's been dipped and thrown at the surface, and I'll go in again and just take a closer look at that so you can see the upper surface. Yeah, can you bring up my camera? And so there's a couple different techniques that you use on this canvas that are different from the other one. Here we have paint that is dripped and thrown on the canvas. And you can see that especially along the edges of the canvas here with the splatters. And as you get to the center of the canvas, you can see how incredible it is. It's been built up with all these different colors. And then Vera comes in actually with a brush. It's hard to see, but some of the white and cream, then she comes in and she touches up and adds to the composition with a brush with the lighter colored paints. So you have two different kinds of application of paint here. And then as you step away, it's this incredibly large explosion of color and life, which really contrasts the bottom piece down here. Okay, you can switch back to the slide. So I think the other thing that I was thinking about when I was looking at this work is just the ways that the upper canvas and the lower canvas really contrast each other, both in application of the medium, in the size, and the subject matter, and then also the emotion. Very compelling in those different ways of complementing each other, but also contrasting each other. So I think to understand a little bit about the way that she's painting, so I talked through a couple different applications of paint in both of them, and how she uses also music, literature, and poetry to drive creation of symbolic paintings. I want to show a short clip from a 2009 documentary of Vera by Woo Jung-bae entitled Blunt Edge. And this gives us an opportunity to see some of the practice that I was just talking about, Vera painting, and also the which she becomes influenced.
This is an homage to Shostakovich. It's an attempt to memorialize his struggle with the Soviet regime that tried in every way to suppress his freedom and his individuality. The pose is holding on to his self. The shape on the left, the black, is the back door at which most Russians expected a visit from the government in the middle of the night. And you hear that in the quartet where you have these three knocks, the knocks at the door in the early hours of the night.
That video clearly illustrates then some of those processes I was talking about. You can see her taping out the door, the symbolic doorway, in that painting on the documentary there. So the taping process, how she was using brushes as well as palette knives to place paint on the canvas, and then also how she was dripping and throwing paint onto the canvas in what she considers this controlled chaos of creating the work. But then the other thing that I find really wonderful about the documentary is it just talks about the way in which she's using other forms of art, literature and poetry, and we can talk about that later too, to drive the creation of these works. How this is not just a spontaneous creation, but this is something that is very well thought out. So with that, I'll pass it over again to Amanda.
Thanks, Joel. Okay. So now that we've talked a little bit about Vera's life experiences, how they've impacted her work, and we know that she's actively using the vessel and other objects or non-objects on a white background as symbols for lots of different ideas. Let's take a deep dive into this painting. I know it looks like two, but it's actually a single painting. It's called a diptych. And its title is A Heap of Broken Images, and it's painted in 2006. And this is where I'm going to invite participation from you all. So we're going to use the chat. And I would like for you to answer, as you're looking at this work, answer this question: what's going on here? There's no wrong answers, just looking to slow down a little bit and have you notice what's going on. This is a common question that tour guides or docents ask in museums. You can drop in a couple words or a single sentence, and then I'll kind of talk through what these objects could possibly represent and kind of make some connections for you. So what's going on here? What do you see? I'll participate myself. I see heads, a pyramid-like form, jars, thank you, from Alumni Relations. Mary says rolling heads, emptying of vessels. Oh, I like that idea of these being objects in action, in the process of doing something or something happening to them. Yeah, thank you. So it's a pretty straightforward composition, right? On the left, we've got this heap of heads and bricks, pitchers, other types of vessels. And really, these are the types of objects that we commonly see in still life compositions, but Vera's just sort of piled them up haphazardly, almost as if to sort of take a dig at traditional still life painting, which I don't know that she's ever really participated in as a practice. And then on the right-hand side, we see this broken pyramid, which is, in the way that she's depicted it, also essentially a vessel. And she's cut the top off, removed it, and then depicted it as if it's hollow. Of course, it's also depicted in these red splatters of paint, which feel aggressive, maybe even a little violent. And of course, the pyramid is sort of a pillar in the history of art, or the canon of art. So ultimately, my interpretation, I have to say, this is really all my interpretation, but I think the value of all of Vera's paintings is that anyone can bring their own knowledge and life experiences to them and apply their own meanings. So my interpretation is that she's chosen to put these objects together in a sort of conversation by depicting something massive, this pyramid, on a canvas at the same scale, or the same size, I should say, next to a pile of still life objects. She's kind of put them on an equal playing field. And I think in a metaphorical sense, what I'm picturing her doing is putting into a box all of these objects and references to art history, the tradition of fine art, which often excludes women and is very rigid in terms of its standards and what it values and what it doesn't. And she's shaken that box up and then rolled out the contents onto one of her blank canvases. So I see it as essentially a slap in the face to traditions of art history and of painting, but in her own Vera sort of way. Thank you, Joel, for doing some close-ups. I kind of forgot that that was my plan, was to navigate away from my slide, but I got off on a tangent. So that's just one example of how anybody can take a deep dive into digging out deeper meanings of Vera's work. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Joel to take a closer look at one last painting, and then we'll share some closing thoughts.
Thanks, Amanda. This is the work I was talking about earlier that's actually in our collection. So it's not here in the gallery, but I thought this would be another great painting to talk about. It's from 1999, and it's entitled "The East Was Red" with Cockrow. It currently hangs in the lobby of one of our living centers, and it's approximately 8 feet by 8 feet, the total composition of the two panels. It really has a lot of the common elements of the work that we've been discussing. It's a similar makeup really to Hollander Witness, which Amanda shared earlier. So we have a large floating vessel on a white canvas on the left panel there, and next to a long and narrow landscape on the right panel. In this case, the landscape on the right, it's actually multiple landscapes that form, some ways, a lineage of the time of day through the different landscapes from top to bottom. The vessel on the large canvas to the left is a wash basin, tipped sideways. And then above it, there's this explosion of red and orange paint above it. And it's kind of hard to see, but there is a rooster that's being coaxed out of the paint splatters on the upper right of that large orange object, really at the top of the canvas too. And this work is titled from a poem by German poet Nelly Sachs, who escaped the Holocaust to Sweden. She had a very similar experience to Vera. And in 2018, Nelly was featured as the Google Doodle of the day. So we're gonna just watch that video quickly. On the video there is a similar story to Vera's. She left a couple of years after Vera did. She left in 1940 as opposed to 1938 and escaped to Sweden. I also like how the video there just mentions that her poetry is intensely lyrical and that she was influenced by German Romanticism, because those are two things that Vera also remarks about in her work. And she talks a lot about how German Romanticism was an influence in her work. So you can see in some ways how Nallie's poetry really resonated with Vera, so much so that it really became the subject of a lot of her work. In 1995, she retired from teaching at the University of Chicago, and she was looking for, looking for some purpose and to get back into her work. And so she started translating poetry, and that helped generate a lot of new pieces, including the one that we have from this one here from 1999. Poetry, which she remarks as sort of being forged by the horrors of genocide. And she writes this about the experience with this poetry and this painting in particular. So these are Vera's words. Sachs' poetry is scorched by the Holocaust. Aside from painting her portrait, her powerful images are at the heart of a number of large works I made at that time. I painted The East Was Red with Cockcrow in 1999, the title taken from one of her poems about the Great Terror. The 8-foot canvas lies on the floor. I throw speckled spirals of blood red paint across the top of the white canvas, the red of the eastern sky, and within that splatter, out of the spots and the dots, I encourage the image of a red rooster to coalesce, a rooster with a glaring green eye. I had thought the red rooster crowing in the red light of dawn was Nellie Sachs's metaphor for the Holocaust, her invention. But I learned that it had an older history. It was a code, a warning to Jews of a coming pogrom. And a pogrom is an ethnic massacre. So this was a warning. There would be warnings that would go out if something would occur. That was something that was known through Jewish communities. So Vera continues, on the lower half of the canvas, I place a starker image, an upended iron wash bucket, a vessel whose function is to amplify the sound of the rooster's message, sort of sending that message out to the community. For the second canvas, the same height of 8 feet, but only 12 inches wide, so very common to a lot of the landscapes that she pairs with her works. I paint 8 small landscapes that form progression in time, from daytime fields to russet sunset, then to night, the last one severely reduced to black and gray, a bleak division of sky and land in homage to the late Rothko paintings in which he had anticipated his own death. I imagine the sound of that death amplified by the wash bucket, resounding over the fields and hills. I glue the small landscapes to the narrow stretcher. And finally, I just wanted to end on this with the poem by Sachs, which is one of the poems that I know that Vera had been looking at and reading. This one, again, in German, translated loosely to English, is How Lonely is Man? And so this is a poem by Nellie Sachs. How lonely human life is. Look out east, where melancholia irradiates the face of dawn. Red is the east with cockcrow. Oh, hear me. To perish in the lion's frenzy and in the whiplash of equatorial lightning. Oh, hear me. To fade into the cherub choirs of sunset. Oh, hear me. To lie awake the whole blue night, a fresh first bud of death upon the lidded eye, still striving on towards the source.
Thanks, Joel. All right, I'm going to stop sharing and share some closing remarks with you all. So we've structured this exhibition around 3 themes. memory, mourning, and symbolism. And we've touched on each of these a little bit today in our conversation. You've seen how Vera's experience of losing her home at a young age and the resulting mourning have echoed through her work for decades. We've discussed her use of the object, a vessel, and others as a powerful tool, suggesting relationships between the past and the present, joy and sorrow, beauty and evil, etc. And we've touched on the importance of memory in her creative process. I don't know if we explicitly said this, but she often doesn't draw or paint from references physically with her in the studio. She paints from memory quite frequently. And you can see these threads and all the work here. If you come to the gallery, I hope you'll all take a moment to come visit in person. Ultimately, Vera's work speaks for itself. If you can't come here physically in person, we have a couple other virtual events taking place that I want to take a moment to plug. Hope that you'll all consider attending. The next is on Friday, April 2nd. We're calling this Vera Vision. It's a celebration of all of Vera's influences and her life. It's from noon until 3 p.m. Physically here in the Performing Arts Center. You can drop in person. We'll also have an opportunity for you to tune in virtually. We're going to have a performance by the Chamber Ensemble of GVSU. This is a group of students. They'll be playing that Shostakovich piece. We'll have a poetry reading, and we'll have some art making demos and maybe even some giveaways, so stay tuned. We'll also be doing one more virtual tour on Thursday, March 8th at 7 p.m. We'll cover some of the same stuff, but there'll also be some new content in there. And you can RSVP to all of those through our website. I'll send out a link to our events page to everyone who joined us here on the tour. And then I just want to thank everyone for joining us. Really appreciate your interest in the exhibition and your support of the GVSU Art Gallery. Joel, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Nope, just thanks everyone, and we hope you get a chance to see the exhibition. And again, if you can't come to the gallery space, there's also a virtual tour online, a 3D virtual tour. So that has the information for each of the paintings, the label copy next to it too. So you can explore that. So again, thank you very much.
Yep, thanks everybody. Have a great day.